An API is an interface, but it's also the source code, the definition spec, the performance measures, tests, documentation. In this video, we'll learn about the Postman API Platform. We'll start with an OpenAPI specification and learn how to version our APIs, release management. We'll learn more about source control and how to manage the entire API lifecycle in Postman. Let's create an API in Postman. In the left sidebar, tab over to APIs, and we'll create our first API. You have to give it a version, and we'll be using OpenAPI in this example. So Postman has created my API here. Let's go ahead and add a summary. Adding a summary and description allows potential internal or external consumers to decide whether or not they want to use my API or contribute to it, so make sure you do that. I haven't added the API to the private network yet, so nobody on my team is going to be looking for it. That's fine. If I want to go over to that first version I created, 1.0, I don't have any documentation yet. None of this stuff has been created. But let's tab over to definition. And I can see this boilerplate OpenAPI specification that Postman has created for me. I actually have one. I'm going to put in my own specification and hit save. So this OpenAPI definition describes the long-term relationship between potential API producer and consumer. What happens when the API changes? As an API changes, the producer might decide to version their APIs to keep track of everything. They might decide to remove or deprecate older versions, or they might maintain versions in parallel. Every version has its own collections, definitions, and repositories. The important thing is that each version can be developed and consumed independently of other versions. Let's generate a collection with version 1.0. So let's hit generate collection. And in our example, let's create some docs and categorize that collection as API documentation. Postman will generate a collection now. And if I go over to the sidebar, I see this collection here has been generated from the OpenAPI specification. If I want to create a new version, back under the API, in the overflow menu, I can create a version. But I haven't done much yet to my collection or my API, so we'll hold off on that for just one moment. Now is a good opportunity to connect our API to source control. Remember, I said that every version can connect to its own repository. And so I selected 1.0, and under the Connect Repository dropdown, I can integrate a Git repo to the API to sync changes between Postman and Git. So I'm already logged into GitHub, so I will auth through GitHub. Now that I'm authorized, I can close this tab and continue in Postman. So let's select a GitHub organization. Postman is fetching my repositories. I've created one already called Space API. I'll select a main branch. This is typically what's going to release to production, and I'll go ahead and leave it the development branch the default. But if you're not allowed or you prefer not to push directly to develop, then you can always select a feature branch there. And if I don't designate anything else, Postman will create a directory for my schemas as well as my collections. And the very first time I connect my repository, Postman will sync my API and all associated collections. But in the future, when I make changes in Postman or when I make changes to my GitHub repository, I can decide to push or pull changes. So let's go ahead and connect repo. And now we're connected. So now if I make changes, you can see this little drop down indicates the branch that I'm connected to and that I'm connected in version 1.0. So let's take a look at version 1.0, and you can see if I'm ahead or behind develop branch. And when I make changes in Postman, I can choose to commit and push up to Git. Or if changes are made in Git, I can decide to pull changes to my version in Postman. When you're ready to deploy a version of your API into staging or production, you can designate a release in Postman. So on the right, under the changelog icon, you can view a unified stream of all the changes that have been made to the API and associated collections. You might have seen the opportunity to create a release early on when we first created our API, but you can do it from here as well. So let's create a release. Let's call this one 1.0 and create. A release in Postman is a significant milestone. It's a snapshot in time, so the definition, the documentation, and the tests are all frozen. You can't edit any of the elements. So later on, when you're continuing to make changes, and now you're on 1.1, 1.2, and so forth, you can always come back here in your changelog and see what was the state of things at 1.0. This is going to be a frozen snapshot in time, and so consumers will see the precise documentation that's associated with that version of your API. Okay, so now it's time for the speed round of the Postman API platform. Everything that I'm about to talk about has a separate video if you want more details. Let's go over some collaboration and some productivity tips that are relatively new in the platform. So I'm here on the changelog, but you might have seen this code generation snippet. You might already know about the client-side code gen. This is the server-side code gen. So you can pick from a language or framework, and you can generate code for the boilerplate API. So I won't go in detail there. You can also, let me get out of this release and go back over to the version. You can also comment. So some of you are already familiar with commenting on collections. You can also comment on your specification. So threaded comments like these are really good for you to call attention to certain issues that need more negotiation in your API contract. All right, so speed round. Let me close some of these tabs. We are here under definition, but if you pop over to the build mode, let's continue down these tabs. This is the API development lifecycle. We've defined our API. Here's our documentation that we've already generated that collection for. We can see a nice human readable view of that documentation here. Let's move on to testing. So you can create collections of your tests or test suites that you want to associate with your version, but you can also connect to continuous integration tools. So this is where you're going to define which CI services you have linked. You can view information about recent builds, and you can execute builds on specific branches. Speed round, deployments. You can stay on top of your API deployments. So you can see in this example here, you can link your version to an AWS gateway. You can show different stages and stages mapped to environments in Postman. And you can see information about recent deployments here on this tab. Monitoring. So you can link collections that have monitors, collection runs that are scheduled on Postman Cloud. You can also connect to application performance monitoring tools so that you can link your version to, for example, New Relic. You can choose multiple services that are configured in your APM. You can view lists of AppDeck scores and other metrics and statuses all from within Postman. So you've always been able to kind of cobble together your own integrations with your favorite tools. But in this case, a lot of work has been done recently to bring that visibility back into Postman so that you're not switching back and forth between tools. All right, let's go back to the API. One thing that we didn't do yet is we didn't add the API to the private API network. So you might already know about the public API network where you can browse public APIs across the world. But if you're working in a team, you probably want to share your API in your definition and all the associated documentation, collections, mocks, and monitors, all of that in the private API network so that it's discoverable to your other team members. So that's right here. And that's it. Right now, your team probably uses some sort of internal wiki page to point to different platforms, but you're still switching back and forth between different tools. The Postman API platform brings it all together so that you can manage your entire API lifecycle from one spot. Check out some of our other videos for deeper dives on any of these topics.